If one were to list the 10 of the hardest sayings in the gospel, the first portion of the selection for Proper 15, this Sunday's gospel, would undoubtedly be on the list. So we have quite a few young people here, so I'm sorry you have to hear the prophetic Jesus today rather than the gentle Jesus who brings peace. But like my dad used to say when we would complain to him, life is tough, suck it up. So maybe that's what Jesus is saying. The statements that Jesus came to bring fire, a distressful baptism, and division, even among families, are hardly welcome words for any congregation. We are happier with Jesus as a peacemaker than as a homebreaker. What is the Lucan Jesus trying to say to us modern disciples of Jesus in the Episcopal way? Is peace something that Jesus brings, or is peace not what Jesus brings? And really, Jesus says both. Perhaps a distinction might be helpful, a distinction between peace lovers and peacemakers. It's only the latter, peacemakers, that Jesus congratulates in the Beatitudes. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall see God. And this speaks of a very high level of participation in the kingdom. Peace lovers like the status quo. They like the way things are, either at home or in the local community, in their nations, or their religion. They don't want anybody to rock the boat by raising inappropriate questions or pointing out things that need serious improvement, or possibly situations that are downright unjust. In a word, peace lovers like everything as it is, for fear of losing the kind of peace that they mistake for the true peace that Jesus brings. Peacemakers, on the other hand, are the voice of the voiceless. They are those who are not afraid to confront. They don't let themselves be distressed by most things, but when there is an issue of serious importance, they have a voice. They speak out. What then is the true peace, the peace that only Jesus brings? In the Hebrew Scriptures, in the Old Testament, shalom is a gift of Yahweh, which signifies completeness, a condition in which nothing is lacking. When one is at peace, possesses peace, then one is in perfect communion with Yahweh, who is peace. And Yahweh desires the peace of those who serve him. Yahweh speaks peace upon his people, and righteousness and peace are joined where his peace is to be found. In Psalm 85, there's that beautiful image where righteousness and peace embrace and kiss. And so the two are never to be separated. Peace, however, does not consist in mere prosperity and well-being. An essential component of peace is righteousness. And where there is no righteousness, there is no peace. In the New Testament, the whole theme of peace continues, building upon the Old Testament notions that I have just talked about. Peace is the fruit of the preaching of the gospel. It is brought by Jesus, and it's an achievement which is not possible to the world. Jesus telling his disciples, my peace I leave to you, my peace I give you, not as the world gives peace. And so this is the peace that the world cannot give. The greeting of peace, when uttered by messengers of Jesus, is a word of power. It conveys the very spirit of the Christ. It conveys the very utterances of Jesus in his ministry, some of the dynamism of the utterances of Jesus. Peace comes through union with Jesus Christ and surpasses all human thought. It reigns in the hearts of Christians who are joined in the peace of the one body of Christ. In a very real sense, peace is very nearly synonymous with salvation. For when Paul uses the phrase, the peace of God, or the God of peace, he has in mind a saving God. Finally, peace in the New Testament is communion with God and Jesus himself, who is our peace, since he is the one who binds us together in communion. And this leads to harmonious relations within the Christian community, as well as a state of interior calm. I remember when I was discerning whether or not to enter the candidacy, for priesthood, I went through a long discernment process, and I was really hesitant about the whole situation. I remember I made one New Year's resolution in my entire life that I've kept, and it was at a bar, actually, a club in Alexandria. And I said, let me be open to the possibility of entering the seminary. So you see how I couched it in all these conditionals, let me be open to the possibility of going to the seminary. And so I made that New Year's resolution, and I thought, well, I better do something about it. So I started praying, reading scripture, and exactly about 9 months later, on October 15th, I woke up and I had this sense of profound peace. It was on the feast of St. Teresa of Avila. I'll never forget it. And I just had the decision was made for me. I felt free, the freedom to pursue that. And that's the peace that comes from Christ. And so in art and poetry over the centuries, Jesus is revealed in various imageries, ranging from the gentle shepherd to the conquering lamb. In theological terms, these twin images represent Christ's mercy and judgment, born out of the reconciling power of God to defeat evil and overcome sin. And so this is the problem that the readings wrestle with today, the problem of evil in our world. In the first reading, Jeremiah is put into a well to try to silence his voice, very deep down, cut off from the light, up to his knees in mud, simply because he fought against injustices, evil, and sin. In the second reading, we are asked not to cling to sin, but to stick to goodness, to fight the battle until the end. Jesus, in the gospel, as we heard, says, "Don't think I came to bring an easy peace." And his words might be interpreted as Jesus saying, the prophetic Jesus saying, I came to bring peace, yes, but I did not come to pull the wool over all the misery in the world so that nobody can see it. Don't think I came to pull a blanket over all the coldness of human relations so that the shiverings will no longer be felt. No, I did not come to bring that kind of peace. I came to bring a fight, a battle, a struggle, a fire, to undo all the evil in the world. And you too should join in my fight against the evil of this world, against sin. And so we don't really have to go very far to witness the sin of the world, the evil, the injustices, the violence, the greed. We wouldn't need a security guard here at St. Michael's and All Angels if there was perfect peace in the world, would we? And you know, the danger to our faith is not so much the fact that people abandon the faith. The danger to the faith is more or less a sense of erosion, the erosion of our faith. You know, Diana Butler Bass, she's a sociologist of religion, and she does a lot of research on religious practices today. And there's a whole category, a lot of the millennials, for example, when they take a survey and ask if they're religious, they check none. And so they're known as the nones. They have no religious affiliation whatsoever. But there's a whole group of people that there's no category to quite define where they go. But Diana Butler Bass, she puts them in the category of the dones. They're done with religion. They've been hurt by their religion, or they've been used by their faith group, so much so that they're burnt out. And so they want to take a break. They're done with all of this struggle to bring the fire of the Spirit upon the earth. And it's interesting, you know, I'm sure there's people here that used to worship with us who, for one reason or another, they're done. They don't want to have anything more to do with the life of faith in a community. And they might be still feel themselves to be spiritual, but they don't want to take part in a religious denomination. They don't want to be part of a community of faith. And so the dones are the ones who maybe have allowed some erosion to take place in their lives. And in almost unnoticed ways, all of us are apt to lose the vision, to forget our motivation, to be swept along with the crowd. We are tempted to forego our freedom, to renounce using our minds to discern the good from the bad. Our religion itself may become a comfortable escape from the real choice for or against God. You know, I never did very well in moral theology. I even flunked part of my moral theology finals, you know. And so I jokingly said, well, you know, I'm an immoral priest because I failed that part of my final test, you know. Because it was all so detailed. I would never make a good lawyer, you know. But there's one thing that I did really grasp onto. It's called fundamental option. And that we all have this fundamental option for God or against God. And the daily actions of our lives reveal something of our fundamental option. Is our fundamental option basically for God or against God? And one of the interesting things about fundamental option is that it can change. And there can be one precise moment in our life where it's discernible that our fundamental option has shifted, it's changed. And we actually go through life, and if we are observant, then we can see that at some point a person becomes the sin. So like when a person who repeatedly falsifies the truth, tells lies, when does the person become a liar? When does that person become the sin? Or if someone harbors murderous thoughts, self-hatred in themselves and hatred for others, when does that tremendous self-hatred take on a life of its own, and the person who harbors these evil, murderous thoughts become a murderer and act out on that hatred? When does someone who repeatedly is not faithful in his or her marriage relationship become an adulterer? So when do we become the sin? And that's when this fundamental option changes. And so that's what Jesus is trying to do. He's trying to help us examine what is our fundamental option. What is going to help us be faithful and not become done with our relationship with Christ? And so to those of us tempted to allow our faith to erode, the author of Hebrews gives this advice: let us keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, who inspires and perfects our faith. And he reminds us that we are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses who are there to support us on this difficult journey through life. And our celebration of the Eucharist wants to remind us of two important facts. It wants us to remember Jesus, and with him the suffering of the world. And it wants us to recognize our communion in the good. We are not alone, but are a part of a community quietly deciding to live for the goal of God's love, whatever the cost. Whatever the cost. One of my heroes of the faith, as was explicated in chapter 11 and 12 in the letter to the Hebrews, is a man named A.J. Muste. And A.J. Muste, born in Holland, immigrated to the United States, and for most of his adult life was involved as a peace activist. And he drew his inspiration from the Sermon on the Mount, saying that the Sermon on the Mount is what gave him the inspiration to be a peacemaker, not a peace lover, but a peacemaker. And late in his life, when he continued to participate in many peaceful activities, he was protesting against the nuclear arms buildup outside the White House. And a reporter once went up to him. He said, Mr. Muste, he said, I know that you've been involved in fighting against the injustices of the world for many, many years, and it doesn't seem as if the world has improved any. It doesn't seem as if all of your activism has made much of a difference. He said, why do you continue doing it? And A.J. Muste said, well, you misunderstand why I do the things that I do. I don't do this to change the world. I do this to keep the world from changing me. I do this to keep the world from changing me. Recently, in New Iberia, we had a prayer vigil for a former reporter for the Daily Iberian named Danny Fester. And Danny, after he left the Daily Iberian, went to Miramar. And he ran an online news service in Miramar, and this was during the revolution. And he was arrested for his writings. And while I was there at this prayer vigil, I met a remarkable young woman named Rosalind Bob. And Rosalind shared with me that she, as a mother, she discovered her son murdered outside her home in New Iberia. What an awful, awful, traumatic event. And of course, she said she was devastated and grieved for about a year, but it kept happening. There were others in her community who were losing children to violence. And so, rather than withdraw from the world, Rosalind formed a community of grief support for parents who lost children to violence in the streets of Acadiana, New Iberia, Abbeville, Lafayette. And she continues this work today. And so the example of someone like A.J. Musty and Rosalind Bobb, these are examples of people who in their own way heard the voice of Jesus and tried to respond lovingly to them. And like these individuals, Jesus invites us to get involved in fighting the injustices of the world, to take a stand against injustice, to strive to eliminate all that oppresses us and keeps us from experiencing the peace that is our salvation. As Hebrews reminds us, in your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood. And so all of us are called today to continue the struggle as the people of God, not as peace lovers, but as peacemakers. Peacemakers for the kingdom.